Rule number one, don't open the door.
I need a little more up top and a little less down below.
Amber alert. Oh God, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. In orbit of Uranus,
It smells.
I don't even want to talk about it.
Oh, no, you love me. You know you love me.
Just don't let it touch the
You know, that's great, but give me a little more.
Why are you shooting at me?
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, and welcome. And it's almost Christmas time out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, a podcast and YouTube channel where two guys sit, there's Mickey all Christmassy, where two guys sit around, they talk about movies, television series, horror, and science fiction. I tend to do the sci-fi, Tim tends to do the horror. Sometimes we switch up, but we both appreciate both genres. We talk about key influences on those genres and then things that particular subject of the week influenced later on. We've been doing it for about 6 seasons now, and for that we thank all of you guys who are returning and listening to us again. We hope you'll enjoy today's episode as well as all the others. For those of you who are new, we have 6 seasons worth, and you can go back to our website and find them and find other things. And we'd love to hear from you. If you would subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things that you have to do. What they always ask, give us a review on Apple. That always helps. Tell all your friends, hey, come to Johnny Has the Keys and listen to some crazy goofiness. My name is David, as I said, and I've got my friend Tim here. Tim, normally we start with what you've been doing in your genre week. What you been doing?
Well, you know, I was thinking I would do a Christmas horror movie, but there just aren't that many of them. And I didn't feel like... I mean, I do like Black Christmas, and we should probably cover it instead one Christmas. Maybe we'll just do Christmas horror movies.
Yeah.
But instead...
Was that the one that came out with what's his name from Stranger Things? Was that Black Christmas? What was the latest one that came out? Bad Santa or one of those Santa?
Maybe that was Bad Santa. Black Christmas is a long time ago. It was Bob Clark, the guy that did Porky's. Yeah. Okay. And it has, oh my God, it has some great cast. I think Margot Kidder's in it. There's like several people in it. It's like a Canadian movie. It's great. Maybe I can't remember. Don't get me started because I don't know enough and haven't researched enough. Anyway, we'll cover that some other time. Instead, I went more modern to a movie that came out earlier this year, not quite a year ago. A little ditty called Megan.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Chucky squared or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Where do I begin? This is,
I'm intrigued because I have read such conflicting reviews and talked to friends and their conflicting reviews about this movie. So I'm really curious to see what you think.
It's, what's the guy? James Wan produced it. I was thinking James Wan directed it, but apparently he did not. He just wrote it. It was directed by a guy named Gerard Johnstone.
Okay.
I have seen one of his movies, one called Housebound, that is kind of a comedy horror movie, and I did not like it and don't really even remember it that well, but I do remember watching it. It's written, like as I said, by James Wan. He came up with the story, but the screenplay is by Akela Cooper, who did other James Wan things, Malignant. Oh, wow. We were just talking about Strange New Worlds. He did a Strange New Worlds episode. Season 2's first episode is what I have in my notes. Anyway, so much for
trial.
Yeah. Yeah, so much for that. It stars Allison Williams. She was the girlfriend from Get Out. Do you remember her?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
I like
good.
her a lot.
Yeah, I like her too. It stars Violet McGraw. She is young Nell from The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, okay.
Great little actress. I'm telling you, it's got a good cast, but it also has a guy in it named Ronnie Ching, Chieng. He is so bad that he actually ruined parts of the movie. And I found myself screaming at the set. You know how you yell at your television set when you disagree with something they do, or if you're a crazy person that watches too many movies or Star Trek.
Yeah.
He's really bad. He would take you right out of the movie. A synopsis is when Gemma suddenly becomes the caretaker of her orphaned 8-year-old niece, Katie. Gemma's unsure and unprepared to be a parent. Under intense pressure at work, she decides to pair her Megan prototype with Katie in an attempt to resolve two problems at once. You know, got a built-in babysitter, plus you're test running something that the company has not let you release yet.
Frankenstein, love it.
Yeah, exactly. But it is obviously, as you mentioned earlier, a Child's Play ripoff. I don't know that I would necessarily call it a Child's Play ripoff, because Chucky was possessed demonically, the doll, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
He was possessed by like a serial killer's spirit. This is actually AI. So you're dealing with modern audiences' fear of artificial intelligence. What does it have going for me? Two things, the psychological aspects and this newfound phobia of artificial intelligence. However, they throw too much humor into it, and it just, you've seen the commercials where she does the weird dance. And
well, what I found interesting was, like I said, so many conflicting reviews. Not that it was good or bad, but some people calling it literally a comedy, some people calling it a horror movie, some people saying it was a mix thereof, sort of thing. I remember the early, because I think it was either you or me mentioned this in a Coming to Get You, like early last year sometime. And the initial trailer for it was really scary. It was I remember one scene that I imprinted on was she was like in the woods and some bully or somebody, and she like gets down on all fours and starts chasing him, and it looked creepy and scary and everything.
Much creepier than that weird dance she does before she comes after that guy down the hall.
Well, you never saw that dance, which evidently, whatever. I find it also telling that you mentioned the cast, but didn't mention whoever plays her, the Megan doll girl.
I don't even know that I had it in my notes or if it's on IMDb, honestly.
And I think
her name is Amy Donald. She's a little girl. The voice is Jenna Davis.
I think they do real well with the CGI with her, because she's creepy. At the same time, she's kind of pseudo endearing, or a cute little, American Girl doll sort of thing.
Right.
But would you classify it as scary, more scary than it is funny then?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, is that it can be thrown in several different categories. I mean, it was also like a gay phenomenon, because she ends up being really bitchy, and the gays kind of gravitate to that. I noticed on different gay channels. I mean, not channels, but media. So, well, all I can say is that since it appeals to so many different aspects of genre, they're making a sequel. That sequel's already underway, unless the writer's strike has prevented some of that. This movie scored 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I totally disagree with that. It is well made, so I would give it an 80. But as far as being scary and like you said, it's trying to do so many different things that it's really not concentrating on one in specific. So no, it didn't scare me. Maybe it made me laugh occasionally, that kind of thing. So its energy is diffused, because it really doesn't concentrate in any of those directions. That's a good analogy. I'm glad you pointed me in that direction.
Interesting. Because, we've talked about how the best to me, to us horror filmmakers also are able to use humor. It deflects from that tense moment, or it throws the audience off for a second before the scare or something like that.
Pacing.
When they use it correctly, it works really well, and actually is almost needed. What made Evil Dead work was some of the humorous asides and quips kind of thing before, the evilness.
Or if you've got a blood killing, lawman like Clint Eastwood, it breaks that up if he says something funny.
Right. But you can overdo it a la any Schwarzenegger film or stuff like that, and twist it and make it so that people can't even tell is this a horror movie or not, which is sad and unfortunate. But yeah, it's on my list, but not near the top anywhere. So eventually I'll probably get there.
No, it's funny. We've been doing these coming to get yous for the past year. So when I see one that I did a coming to get you for, and I see it drop somewhere streaming, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to go watch that.
Yeah. And
that's exactly what happened here. I decided I would pop in one Saturday morning and watch this. So,
okay. Well, in my quest to, since I don't have you have Shudder, I don't have Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi is not a sci-fi channel. I'm just telling everybody. But anyway, I did find something I had never seen. And even though we have already covered this movie on the podcast, I cannot believe I did not find this documentary. There's a documentary out called Never Surrender, and it is a Galaxy Quest documentary. And it is excellent. If you like Galaxy Quest, if you like Star Trek, if you like science fiction, if you like documentaries, it's very well done. It falls into that category of, there were a bunch of documentaries that came out in the 2000s and 2010s of fandom in general. There was one called, I think, On the Bridge, and William Shatner actually produced that documentary, and it was all about the captains of all of the Star Trek series and the actors who played them and their relationship with the fans and everything else. There's also a couple of documentaries I think they're called Fansies is the name of it. And it is basically, and there's Trekkers, which is another one. But it's basically following this whole fan, because Star Trek, basically the popularity is due to fandom. I think we've even said on the sister broadcast, if the producers that ended the third season of Star Trek, if they had continued to do like 2 more seasons, there probably wouldn't be Star Trek now. It probably would have been one of those series like Lost in Space that just kind of went away. But because it was canceled and the fans, brought it back, and then it was canceled again and the fans brought it back, and finally they canceled it after that 3rd year, and then it went into syndication, it became this groundswell cult following, conventions, yada yada, that eventually led to the movie and then led to all the series and everything else. So it's that relationship to the fandom. This documentary is about Galaxy Quest, which we all know is this love affair with Star Trek and fandom. And it had such I don't remember when we covered the movie, I don't remember me finding out a lot of this trivia about it. It was originally with Ramis. Harold Ramis was signed to direct the movie. I knew that.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
But he left the project with creative differences. Mm-hmm. Originally, the script had the lead in it, who was played by Tim Allen. The whole deal about it was he hated his job. He hated the series. He hated the character, everything. And that was the original screenplay that the studio greenlit and Harold Ramis was going to direct and everything else. And you can kind of see that. You can kind of see that
Bill Murray in it.
Put Bill Murray in it, and he would be the chronic complainer, yada, yada. Or even Aykroyd would have done that well too. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the new writer, when they got the new writer in, they said, okay, read the script and give us the pitch and yada, yada. His pitch was, oh no, Jason Nesmith loved his job and he misses it. And it's all about this pastiche of actors who saw their prime way back then. kind of thing. And what happens if they, they're only living, foot to mouth now, but going to conventions and all that. And that to me was the whole core of the movie.
Right.
And it worked. And it's a brilliant, we both love the movie anyway, but the movie is awesome. But this entire documentary focuses on 3 or 4 groups of fans too, who are still showing up as Thermians and going, and all of that. And at conventions and it's got interviews with all of the original cast. So even down to, what was her name? The Pyle, I think the one that didn't talk.
Yes.
And everything else. And
yes, she's great.
Yeah. And it's got interviews with, of course, Tony Shalhoub and all the actors and Tim Allen, all the producers, the writers, everybody. And it's just it gives homage to the fans that loved the show, that kept it, because, when it debuted, the studio really didn't know how to promote it. So it really didn't. And it found its following just like Star Trek did, when it went to VHS and everything else. So great, great documentary.
I was going to say, when you mentioned that the actor originally was going to hate the job.
Yeah.
That was the secondary character that Alan Rickman played, which I believe kind of is along the lines of Leonard Nimoy. I think he got tired of playing Spock too.
And that's what the writer, who is really, I can't remember his name right now, unfortunately, but the writer of it, that's what he said. He said, I wanted that to be the Nimoy character, the classically trained actor who can't believe this other hack is getting all the stuff. And when they got Rickman, it's great. And the really cool thing about how you made me reminded me, the documentary goes into the development of the sequel. They were going to do a second one. The writer had written it. The director was going to come back. All the cast was, ready to go and excited about it. And then Alan Rickman died. And They all just kind of said, I don't know if we can even do this without him. He was such an integral part of it. But it's so, Tim, you've got to see the macro of the macro of the macro of this.
I was going to say, that's really weird, because that movie was obviously making fun of Star Trek, or at least paying homage to Star Trek.
Yeah.
So to do a documentary about a film that is, it's just weird. It's like you said, it's boxes within boxes.
It was really two final things, I guess. One was they did when they were talking about it, they were talking about the relationship on set between Tim Allen and Alan Rickman was a lot like Shatner and Nimoy, where Tim Allen was always cracking fart jokes and trying to crack everybody up and being silly and being the comedian. And Rickman was like so into his character, and you've got to feel the scene, and why are you making fun of this? And and they talk about the scene which is the scene they actually used to kind of convince the studio to give them a little bit more money for the end. But it's the scene where the commander has to talk to Mathazar and tell him that they're actors, and how it destroys Mathazar and everything else. And the writer and the director and the producer are talking about filming that scene, and the fact that, on about the 4th or 5th take, Tim Allen was really doing it and was tearing up and everything. And that was the one day that Spielberg appeared on set. And the director talks about, I'm watching the monitor and everything else, and all of a sudden I hear this voice beside me say, Tim's really good in this. And I look over and it's Steven. And he's amazed at how good Tim Allen is in the scene. A few minutes later, Tim Allen says, I'm sorry, guys, this is a little much. Can I go to the trailer? And he leaves, and Alan Rickman is standing there, and he goes, I think he just experienced acting.
Oh, my God.
And I thought,
Laurence Olivier thing.
Yeah, but that is such a Nimoy line, too, and so true. But talk about the meta. So it shows them, they're at a screening. This was only like 5 years ago. They're at a screening in Los Angeles. All the stars were there. The producer, the writer, everything else. And of course, people are in costume, and they thought they might have, it was in Texas. So it was at the Alamo Draft House for South by Southwest. And they thought they'd sell like maybe 100 tickets. They sold out in like an hour and had a line around the block for it. Anyway, they show the movie, then they bring everybody out for the talk back and everything else. And at one point, the guy doing the interview says, "So what do you think is the legacy of Galaxy Quest? Do you think it will continue?" And the director just pointed to the front row, and it was full of like these 6 people all dressed as Thermians, and they're all going, la, 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 la. And he goes, "That's the legacy right there. The legacy continues. This is meta on meta. I can't believe."
I mean, they really could continue with it if they wanted to. I mean, they could do an animated series and cast someone that talks very similarly to Alan Rickman, or they could technically remake it with just everybody recast and not remake the film, but do a different film and just recast it, a different story. That is.
Well, there is talk right now of doing a series. Of doing a
that would
short
be great
10-episode series of it, and it's more about the making of the series kind of thing, which would be interesting.
It would be. I would also love just to see the series and for them to do episodic stuff and be better than any of the Star Trek stuff we've seen lately.
Better than Strange New Worlds and Discovery. Yes.
Right, and it would even be better if it was cheesy with like bad special effects and stuff.
Yeah. So I don't have a
Wow.
segue from that to horror, or to being, anything. So,
well, I have a bit of a segue because my topic was very female centric. And this movie that we are covering today is female centric as well.
Boy,
as
howdy.
David mentioned, we're in the second of our triple play of holiday themed episodes. And we are doing Stephen King in the 21st century. We did Stephen King way back when, a few seasons back. Now we're doing him in the 21st century. And this one is a little ditty directed by someone we are big fans of,
Huge.
Mr. Mike Flanagan. It is called Gerald's Game.
Yep.
Did you watch this movie when it came out?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you had seen it yet because it's been on Netflix for several years now. Came out in 2017, so it's almost 6 years old.
I had read the book, so that was one of the because I stopped reading King for a while, especially after the Tommy Knockers and that kind of
Tommy
stuff.
Knockers was his last drunk book. He quit drinking after that book.
And I remember reading Gerald's Game. There was another one about not Bag of Bones or something like that, but there was one about similar to that. Was that it?
Well, there is one called Bag of Bones. It's about a cabin on a lake that's haunted.
Right. And then there was one about a baseball, something with a baseball girl.
The Girl That Loved Tom Gordon is about a girl that gets lost in the woods and starts talking to her favorite baseball player, who is imaginary, obviously.
Well, it's interesting that you did that as a segue, because one of my observations on this was King has really strong and unique female characters. And he had a series there where either the villain or the protagonist was a female, not the typical, I'm doing a male. We tend to associate King with, the hero is going to be a writer, or, like we did last week with The Mist, it's going to be an artist, some kind of creative is our protagonist in it. But he had like Dolores
Claiborne was the sister novel to this novel. They were packaged as Under the Eclipse back in the 90s because both
I've never read or seen that movie.
Okay, well, both of them center around the eclipse of the sun, a very famous eclipse that happened on some day. I may have it in my notes. Anyway, and during it, in this film, obviously, it happened when Jessie was a child. But in Dolores Claiborne, Dolores is an adult, and they both, in the book, they both see each other during the eclipse. Like she sees Dolores' world and Dolores sees her world. And that was what connected the books. I could see why you would easily read this book or Tom Gordon, though, because Stephen King was known for writing these gigantic door stopper books, that are 1,000 pages. Both these novels are easy reads and very short. That
Green
Dolores
Mile was
Claiborne,
the same way.
yeah. And that Tom Gordon book that you mentioned as well.
I'm curious because I was having my notes. I just thought I'm sure it'll come up when we step through it. But where does this fall in the Dark Tower series? Has he already done Gunslinger and all of that by the time he wrote this?
He had done the first 3. Maybe he was working on Wizard and Glass around this time. But definitely Drawing of the 3, and I'm pretty sure The Wastelands were already out.
So he had already published his Dark Tower world or started on it.
Yeah. I mean, that the original Dark Tower book he wrote in college. So then it got published in like the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think there's any tie-ins. If there are, I don't remember them in this or Dolores Claiborne to the Dark Tower.
Well, there's a distinct tie in this one that threw me off. That's why I mentioned it.
That's Flanagan. I can't remember what it was though.
It's when the husband is talking to her at one point, and he's giving her all the depressing "you're going to die" kind of stuff, and he's laying right beside her. He says, "All things serve the beam."
Yeah, that's Flanagan.
And I thought, what the hell does that mean? I don't even know what that. And then it suddenly occurred to me, the beams are in Dark Tower. There's something about the 6 beams that hold up the universes or whatever.
I don't think that's in the book. I think Flanagan did that as a little piece of candy for all of us, fanatics.
Okay, so did that like an Easter egg for us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is ironic because all fingers are starting to point toward him being the director of the Dark Tower books series, Amazon, whatever is in development over there.
He should.
Yeah, I totally agree. And before we get into talking about how magical he is, let me do a quick synopsis on this. Basically, this is a book about Jessie and her husband, Gerald, and they are on their way to, I want to say it was a mountain retreat in the book, but it's definitely on the coast in this one because they're on either the ocean or a big lake. And it's isolated. You don't realize it at first, but it becomes clear that this is maybe a last ditch effort at trying to save their marriage. They are not a very happy couple. And there's a few things. It's been a long time since I read this book, so I'm going to have trouble remembering what is actually from the book and what is from the movie or vice versa. I have a feeling it's very faithful, though, considering that it's Mike Flanagan. They get to this cabin. They're going to have some sex. He wants to spice things up. He brings some handcuffs. There's a point where you actually see him take a blue pill, which is obviously Viagra. I'm not certain, but I think Viagra has been linked to people having heart attacks if they already are susceptible to heart attacks. I think Viagra could increase that. And so you already got a little bit.
Second one too,
right? So you've already got a little bit of a foreshadowing there. He handcuffs her. She is quite obviously not into it, and after a while, she gets fed up and says, "This is not working for me." She even bites him because he won't pay attention to her. He keeps trying to seduce her, and she is not comfortable. And when he finally comes off of her and he is mad, he has a heart attack while she is still handcuffed to this bed and dies. And she is stuck in the middle of nowhere with no one to rescue her, handcuffed to a bed with his dead body, which she has to kick off of her onto the floor at the foot of the bed.
No, he falls. She doesn't kick off. She doesn't kick him off.
He collapses on top of her, but she has to push him off her with her feet.
Off of her. Yeah. Which makes him fall, and we hear that crunch when he lands.
Yeah, and then we're in the land of Stephen King, where it's just like a kid in a toy store what he can do to freak you out. Namely, there is a dog introduced earlier in the film. When they are driving, they see him eating some roadkill on the side of the road. The dog starts coming in, taking little pieces of Gerald with him, and there's nothing she can do. Her husband's basically, she doesn't even see it. She just kind of hears it happening.
Which makes it worse.
Yeah, definitely makes it worse. And then she starts having delusions where she's having conversations with herself and Gerald because she's dehydrated. She's basically losing it. And you start learning more about what happened to her as a kid, which is a secondary story in this movie and novel. There's also, and this is what really creeped me out in the book, there's also since they're setting up the fact that she's imagining these conversations between herself and her dead husband, all of a sudden at night, she starts seeing this creepy figure standing in the corner of her room. And she calls him the Moonlight Man because she thinks he's imaginary. But Stephen King flips it at the end when you realize he was there the entire time. This guy existed, and he was a necrophiliac that collected pieces of dead people, had sex and ate them, and was actually in the room with her, which just totally, to me, is one of the most terrifying things about this whole thing. And I've glossed over the story of her childhood, but she was abused when she was a child by her father. Very slightly, but still there. And
it's implied that was more than slightly, though.
Okay, but the scene they show is basically her just sitting on his lap, which is kind of creepy enough in its own while they're watching the eclipse. I'm not going to go any more on the synopsis. Oh, she does. Well, actually, she does eventually escape. She basically has to deglove herself, which is she cuts herself with a piece of glass and literally slides her hand out of the thing while her skin kind of reverses off like a glove. It is so horrible. But you know what? It was either that or she was going to die. So I guess you do what you got to do. One thing I wanted to touch on before we continue, though, is that you mentioned that he has a knack for powerful female characters. And you also mentioned that he wrote about writers. Well, he did. He went through phases where it's like the phase where he wrote about writers, Jack Torrance, Ben Mears, and Paul Sheldon, those guys that were all central characters to famous Stephen King books. But he also went through what I call his abused women phase. And it began with this book, Dolores Claiborne's the second book, and then Wizard and Glass came out, and then he did Rose Madder, which to me is the least of the three abused or battered women books. I can appreciate them more now, but when I was a younger man and reading these, they kind of got on my nerves a little bit because I was like, I'm tired of him writing about abused women. But, it is a thing that happens. And now I can go back and watch this with much more appreciation than I had at the time.
Well, I think it's become cliche for him, so to speak, with the writer stories or whatever, but that's not to denigrate them or say they're bad or they don't exist. King also writes incredibly abusive bullies and always have. Next week's podcast is going to have some horrible bullies in it. And he's good at writing these. I don't want to say redneck because that seems like it's a cliche or a derogatory now, but it's true. But these
stereotypes,
disenfranchised, poor stereotypes of abusive males, and Stand By Me, the bad. There's bullies in that. There's bullies in almost all of his stories.
Some of them overlap. I think I can't remember. I get them all confused, but because they were written around the same time. But I want to say Stand By Me, It, and some of those bullies overlap. Hochstetter is one of them. And there's the one that ends up in the insane asylum in It. Anyway.
Yep. Bowers, whatever.
Bowers, that's it. Henry Bowers. I could not think of his name.
There's a lot of, and the one that kills himself with the scissors on the sink.
That's Frank Dodd. He's not a bully. He's a psycho. He's a cop in the dead zone.
Yeah, because that was going to get to my segue of, he does these bullies. He also does these people who are fine, upstanding, blah, 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 but have this huge, horrible darkness or secret or whatever. And it's not just that Stephen King does this alone. Other writers do that, of course, but he's just so good at these internal monologues and what people are thinking and that kind of thing. And the screenplay for this, being able to take this obviously internal monologue for a good 90% of the freaking book and turn it into a compelling movie, is well done. And I love the fact that he uses this, the husband becomes this antithesis. He's always the negative, the bad, the you'll never make it, or, oh, let me tell you this secret that you never knew about and how horrible I am, kind of thing. And it's just because you're bad too. And then she has herself, or is projecting herself. And that one is more of a, you can do this. You've got to stop here, and more the self-protective side of her. And I really liked the way they did that and the way he shot that with the, her essentially being herself. And then with the Bruce Greenwood husband character being the villain.
Or her turning her head and talking to herself suddenly. I mean, he was really creative in how he did that in this.
Yes. And to your point, to sum up, I guess my little initial reactions, the confusion stuff that he adds, like the fact that the dog gets scared and runs away. And so she's going, yeah, but I was just imagining that. I was imagining my husband, I was imagining myself, and I was imagining the shadow guy in the corner. And then he goes, then why'd the dog run away? If it was just your imagination, what scared the dog? And you're going, oh my God, that's right. Oh, she is going crazy, blah, blah, blah. And you think, oh, it's all over. And you're going to have that nice little misery kind of ending with her starting the little, she starts a nonprofit for battered women, I think is her thing. And she has the glove on her hand from all the surgeries. Right. And you think that's going to be roll credits. And then suddenly, no, we get into this whole last thing of this horrible, serial killer.
She starts finding articles on this guy that had been in the area and was like, he had been caught and he was an necrophiliac, and they'd found jars of body parts all over his house, and his sister and her husband dead, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre style, sitting in chairs in his house. And he had partially eaten her husband. I mean, just all kinds of horrific Jeffrey Dahmer type crap.
Yeah. And I think that's my key for him, though. I do think that King was kind of channeling Dahmer for that, because he was a necrophile. He was going after men and boys. He was a collector. So all of that, I think, was his, kind of not homage. Can you have an homage to a serial killer? I hope not.
Influence.
Anyway, reference.
Yeah, I mean, he was influenced by what was going on at the time. That's another thing Stephen King does really well, is modern reference. I'm sure he was channeling John Wayne Gacy when he did It, the murderous clown.
Oh yeah.
And then in Under the Dome, I don't know if you've ever read that novel, but it's bad. Breaking Bad. I mean, there's like meth manufacturing in this novel. There's meth selling and gangsters going against each other because of meth selling. So, I mean, you could tell he's very influenced by something he's watching or aware of at the time he's writing. Yeah.
Right. So all that being said, I loved this movie. I think this movie is so well done. And I remember watching it because it was, to me, a Netflix original. They said it was a Netflix original. It was produced by Netflix. It was for, and at that time, I'd never heard of Mike Flanagan. I'd never seen, I still to this day haven't seen Oculus or Ouija or any of his previous
I think
stuff.
Hush came out first. I think Hush may have been his first Netflix produced movie. I could be wrong. I think this was his second. And then some of the others that are on Netflix are just things he had done prior to an agreement with them. I may be speaking out my ass there, but that's the feeling I have, is that this was his second Netflix movie.
I thought it was reversed, but I may be wrong. And I did, because I can't find it in my notes right now, but I thought this one was his first contract. And because it was so successful, they let him do Hush.
Okay. Did Hush come out after this? I thought it came out before this.
We'd have to look it up and see in the interwebs to find out. But I mean, I remember.
Yeah, Hush was 1 year before this.
Okay. So you were right then.
But I think Oculus was actually a theatrical release, and anything prior to that may have been in movie theaters. I'm pretty sure.
Ouija was too, or Ouija 2, or whatever the other one.
Right. And then he got in bed with Netflix and just worked with them for like years.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Because I've liked everything he's done. So
it
doesn't. And I might still like Oculus or Ouija. I don't know. I haven't seen them yet. But I think Flanagan has such an incredibly good eye. He's a great pairing with Stephen King. I mean, we said last week that Darabont is such a nice pairing with King. So is Mike Flanagan, almost better.
I mean, I think we both said last week that the two best directors ever paired with him are Darabont and Flanagan, for sure.
Yes. Agreed. I mean, Shawshank on one side, and then you've got everything else on the other over here. I mean, sorry, I got to jump up and say, and Reiner, because Misery and Stand By Me are both excellent.
But they're the only ones he did. He kind of stopped at 2.
Okay. Well,
Darabont's done 3 and wants to do a 4th. Then Flanagan's done 3 and is probably doing a 4th. Yeah.
Probably doing, hopefully, 5, 6,
Dark
7,
Tower.
4, 5, 6, whatever.
Yeah.
I still think he should use the Ron Howard thing and do a combination of movie and limited series.
I think that's what he's talked about.
I think it'd be phenomenal. Because I remember Ron Howard, that was his plan. He was going to do a movie and then like a 6-part miniseries and then another movie and then like another series to do the whole, because that's epic, freaking epic. Jesus. I mean, anyway. And we've totally ignored the movie.
For folks out there that are clueless as to what we're talking about, we are again talking about the Dark Tower because all things lead to the beam. Yeah.
Yes. All things serve the beam.
All things serve the beam. That's it. But scenes. Well, first of all, before we go into scenes, I wanted to mention something that I thought this would make a great play. But how the fuck would you cast it? Because you would have to have 2 sets of twins. Because the one actor would always have to be dead at the foot of the bed, and she would always have to be handcuffed to the bed. Yet the other 2 of them walking around talking to her would have to look like them,
Yes. They wouldn't have to be twins so much as they would have to be similar. I would probably, if we were doing it as a play, my initial thing is I would have the alter egos in modern dress rather than in their current dress of the slip and the shorts. So
that makes sense, and that would distinguish them a little bit more. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
But yeah,
you could get away with casting different folks if you had them dressed in regular clothes,
right?
Yeah,
I mean, I think the hard part of this one would be the dog. Because that's such a good, scary part, but you have to have him come over and lick the blood and then suddenly start to bite. And then later on, look over in the corner and he's standing at the doorway just eating chunks of your husband. I mean, that is just terrifying. But
I mean, it's perfectly set up to be a play because of the setting. But you're right.
Well, the same thing he did with Misery. Misery was and has been done as a play. So this would be another one to reach out to King and say, hey, can we do the theatrical adaptation of this?
Right.
I also found it interesting that, he's dealing with it's not a kink, but it becomes a kink. And I like the way he does that because he it starts out with, I mean, the very first credit sequence is we're looking at each of them pack, and she packs the slip and he packs the cuffs, and you're kind of going, oh, okay, now I got Gerald's Game down. Okay, cool. All right. And you kind of think, oh, this is something they do, but then you find out, no, it's something they've never done. He wants to try it. She says no. And then it turns into almost like a rape fantasy thing, which is not good.
And he can't tell if she's role playing or not.
Right. Where's the safe word? Don't you understand the rules? Let me out or uncuff me the fuck now kind of says it,
Right.
But okay, scenes. So all of it. No.
So many. Well, my first one would be this one here, where she wakes up and that moonlight man is licking her foot.
Okay.
And then you realize it's not him, it's the dog. She wakes up like half dreaming, thinking it's the moonlight man licking her foot when it's actually the dog, and he actually bites her foot. Yeah. And she kicks him because the dog has decided he doesn't want the dead husband anymore. He's going to eat the woman in the bed.
Which is exactly what her husband told her is, how long you think he's going to eat on me? There's fresh meat right here, kind of thing. Yeah, that's a good scene.
I've got another one. I love when the first time the dog bites a piece off of her husband's arm. Later on, the husband stands up and his arm is like bleeding. And he's like, damn, what happened? And you think, oh my God, he just blacked out. He's alive. And she's like so relieved. And he goes and uncuffs her and gets her out of the bed. And they walk across the room. And then they just happen to turn and look back at the bed. And she's still there handcuffed because none of this had really happened.
Yeah. And that was his transition to the delusion. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great scene.
Very well done. Yes. Really great scene. I like some of his superfluous stuff too. I liked the opening because the opening drive and almost hitting the dog, and then the way they are so they're tiptoeing around stuff so much, and you see so much of their. It says a lot about these two actors who are very, very incredibly good. The way they do stuff, her doing the meat and him going, that's $200 a serving. That's really
Kobe beef you're feeding that dog.
And she's like, oh, I'm so, she starts to apologize. He goes, it's okay. And grabs her hand and comes in, which means, oh, I'm paying for doing the Kobe by having to follow you into the room now or be dragged into the house. So much so that I don't close the door behind me. Even though I look back at it and it's still open, but I'm going to have to do what you say, honey, kind of thing. And there's a lot of subtlety to it. There's a lot of great ambiguity. Loved that whole establishing each of them because he doesn't have that long to be established at the beginning before he dies. So I like the way they do that. At the same time, she's caring about the dog and feeding it. He's prepping and taking Viagra.
Right. It's such great character development. And I was going to mention, I mentioned earlier, when you see him taking the Viagra, it's all the subtleties that Flanagan does just as throwaways that mean so much. Like you said, the dog in the very beginning, that dog plays a major part in this movie. And you think, oh, they're just driving by a stray that's eating roadkill. You don't realize how big of a part that dog's going to play in this. Same with the Viagra. The Viagra is what basically they insinuate, kills him, makes him have a heart attack or what have you. All those little subtleties, the packing of the handcuffs, like you said, everything foreshadows what is coming next.
I think this is a great movie for screenwriters to look at either the script and or the movie for the plants and the payoffs. We've talked about that in scripts about you plant something and it pays off later. It's that whole Chekhov's gun theory of, Chekhov For those of you who don't know, Chekhov, the playwright, said once that if you show a gun in Act 1, it better go off by Act 3. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the thing. And there's so many plants in this, from the cuffs to the dog to the Viagra to the and the way they pay off later on is great, even down to the Moonlit Man, showing him and opening his case and all that. And then that pays off at the very end because they never found her wedding ring, sort of thing, because she gives it to him before
it's
she
like
walks
payment to leave
out.
Which is a very good key I just thought of.
And it's all set as puzzles. The glass above the headboard, the tag that he wastes the scene, the time, or takes the time whenever Flanagan or great filmmakers do that, I automatically now go, uh-oh, that's a plant, because he's gone to the bathroom and she's got the slip on and she reaches back and feels the tag on it and goes, oh, and tears it off. But instead of throwing it away somewhere, she puts it on the headboard above her. And I was going, oh, that's a plant. I don't remember how, but that's definitely a plant.
It's showing that she can reach up there. And then when he comes in from taking the Viagra, he has the water in his hand, and Mike deliberately shows him put that glass of water up on that
Put it up
shelf.
above her.
Yes.
And later on, she uses that tag as a straw, which is great. All that works. Just really good scenes. Go.
You could go. Well, I was going to go back to what you said about screenplay writing and the screenplay being so well written. Well, that ties in with what we said earlier, and that is that Frank Darabont and Mike Flanagan are writers, and they write their screenplays for their Stephen King movies. And they are such Stephen King fans, they know exactly how to do it. The only other person credited with writing on this is a guy named Jeff Howard, who is a frequent collaborator of Mike Flanagan's. They have done movies together. They're friends. So, but this is Mike Flanagan's screenplay, pretty much. So,
yeah. And it plays so well. My other two scenes, I guess, would be, I already mentioned the last scene. I like that last montage voiceover sequence with the Moonlight Man. I think that's really memorable and really good.
The one where she's leaving and gives him the wedding ring? Is that the one you're talking about?
No, the one where she goes to the courtroom and she reads.
But
before that, she's reading all the articles about him and blah, 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 and all of that. So,
right.
I really thought that was a great sequence. The picture. So one on your left right now of her facing him is one. And then the other one is one of my other scenes too, which is this, you can't mention this movie without her escape, and that is so horrible but so well filmed.
And it's one of those rare moments that I still have trouble watching. I've seen so many horrible things happen in movies, but I can still watch it. When this scene comes up, I still find myself turning away. I'm like, this is too much. This is awful. This woman is literally degloving herself.
So believable. And as she actually moves her fingers, you can see the tendons move from where it's ripped off and over. I was going, oh my God.
Yeah, but it's awful.
Would you do it? It's like she said, until it coagulates, blood is slick as oil, sort of thing. So man,
I think you could do it without degloving yourself. I think the blood might be enough of a lubricant and the dehydration that your hand could probably get small enough to slip out.
But you would have to somehow move it over so it would bleed down onto the cuff rather than down your arm. That doesn't do you any good.
Right.
Anyway,
it's horrible.
And then I've got a big kudos to, and I had totally forgotten this because this might be a good segue to cast eventually, but when she goes into her flashback and remembers her childhood, her mom is Flanagan's wife. It's what's her name that I like so much, and her dad is Henry Thomas, who I totally forgot about. And from the minute you see him, something is odd.
Yeah, he's creepy.
And it's not that he's like lecherous. It's just the way his inflections, the way he looks, his kind of high mouse kind of. It's just, and it's brilliant. His play all the way through. And then, especially in the modern world we're living in, that scene in the bedroom with her later on should be used word for word for this is what gaslighting is. Because he totally gaslights her into saying, no, we should keep it a secret then. You think so? Really? Oh, okay. Well, if you want to, then I'll do it. He
totally makes her think it's her idea.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. And the fact that we should do it because, I should go tell her right now, even though it'll ruin her and hurt the marriage and hurt our family and and all that. I should go do it. So I'm going to go do that. I
should have put some pictures. I don't have any pictures of them in here. Sorry about that, folks.
So again, some great scenes in this, in my opinion. Yeah.
I mean, I would go also, I mentioned the two scenes that I mentioned, but I would also say that scene you said at the end where she sees him in the courtroom and she's just compelled to go there. She knows she has to go there and face this thing that was in that room with her, but did not bother her because apparently he's more akin to taking pieces off men than he is women. And he looks her in the face. She yells. I mean, she interrupts the courtroom. She like hollers at him and he turns around and he goes, "You're not real."
Uh-huh.
I was like, holy shit. That is exactly what she said to him in that room.
Yep.
And then he goes, "You're just made of moonlight."
As I remember you, I watched you for 2 whole days.
Ooh, yeah. So fucking creepy. Just kills me.
Well, the fact that
it killed me in the book too.
You were so delusional, you couldn't really tell reality from fantasy, in your opinion, and then found out that part of your delusion was real. And there was a killer literally at the foot of your bed, kind of thing. Man. It's brilliant. It's brilliantly done.
We usually do a little bit of pre-production. I don't have much. I have 2 things. One, very briefly, is all of Mike Flanagan's films were directed, wrote, and edited by him.
So there you go.
I mean, he may have help, but they're people he knows and trusts. And I've got a list of them, and you've already mentioned them: Oculus Hush, Before I Wake, Ouija, Gerald's Game, Dr. Sleep. And then, of course, the series is Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, Midnight Club, and the upcoming Fall of the House of Usher. What did you think of the music in this movie?
I like the music in this and the lack of it in places.
I was going to say there is no music in this movie. There's hardly any music at all in this movie.
There's some tonality that he uses with the eclipse. So I noticed it because I went, by the end of it, I was going, wait, I didn't hear any, there was no themes. I didn't hear any music in this, except for in the car when they're driving.
Right.
And which was the same music they were using for the credit sequence. So it kind of worked. But so I went back, and during the eclipse scenes, the flashbacks and everything else, he's using just some underbed tonalities, but no thematic really to it. Melody.
Right. And we mentioned earlier how the eclipse connects the books, but the way the eclipse plays in this film is it is associated with her flashback of being molested by her father. Her mother and brother and sister or whatever go out on a boat with her mother, and she stays back and watch the eclipse with her father. Basically, he convinces her to sit on his lap as the eclipse is happening. And she's like watching it through one of those things to protect her eyes. And he is obviously doing something to himself.
Yeah.
And he's just like, don't pay attention. Just watch the eclipse. Just watch the eclipse. And you're like, oh my God, this is awful. This is just terrible.
Yeah.
And then
it's
the
gaslighting later
scene.
on, because her alter ego self says, well, no, he didn't do anything then, but what about the other times when he came into your room? So it was implied that it got worse, or the abuse got worse. One thing that I noticed in this, kind of in pre-production, because it deals with Flanagan, how brilliant he is, was she has that standoff in the courtroom, and then she goes outside, and it's just this one tracking shot of her coming across the street, and she is so gorgeously lit. It's almost unnaturally lit, because you can see that she's got her authority back and she's in control and she feels good about what she did, yada, yada. And she puts her sunglasses on and starts to walk past the camera, cuts to behind her, and she's walking down the street with the big buildings and the sun's in the background setting kind of thing. And she's still brilliantly lit. But I noticed it on this time, that last shot of her walking away, up where the sun is, the eclipse is going away. It's eclipted. And there's just the moon shadow is moving away from it.
Interesting.
It's like, and I never noticed it. It's a subtle thing, but the fact that he overlit her so much, kind of makes you think, oh, she's going to be okay. So then when we turn into reverse, oh, she feels good, she's going to be okay, and the eclipse goes away.
Right.
And I thought, oh, brilliant.
It's like she's had some majorly fucked up things happen to her, but with lighting alone, I can make you feel like she's going to be okay.
Oh, and he uses,
it's great.
And I remember it from the book too, but her husband tells that joke that is such a derogatory, insulting, horrible joke. And
I can't remember what it is, but I know what you're talking about because he says it in the movie.
Yeah. And it's in the book. It's in the movie. He talks about being at a party, being drunk, looking at her across the room. And the joke he's telling
is life support system. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the definition of a woman?
Right. I think we used to read that joke. Me and you used to read those Truly Tasteless Jokes books. And I think that was one of them. I think that was in that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible, especially by today's standards. That is a terrible thing to say.
Right.
But he kept it in there and even makes her repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, she has suffered a lot under abusive men her entire life. And you do get the feeling at the end that after this trial and ordeal, she is strong and confident enough to, live her life.
Right.
Sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, we can go on to cast. I don't have a lot. I mean, we'll just talk a little bit about each actor because, basically Mike Flanagan casts who he wants, and you don't see a lot of speculation about who could have been in this cast.
Nor do you need to.
No. This is the first movie I think that he did with Carla Gugino, unless she was in Ouija or one of those older ones that I don't remember. This is the first one I remember her prominently in before the series is on Netflix. And she plays Jessie, the wife in Gerald's Handcuffs.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's fantastic. As you said, everybody in this movie is very well cast.
Always.
Do you know her from anything else besides Mike Flanagan movies?
I remembered her in Watchmen because she was the mother. She was
Sally Jupiter. Yeah.
And I had remembered her in that. Of course, I remember her now from Hill House.
Right. Me too.
She was just amazing in that. But I don't think I really had known of her before because she did a bunch of television. I remember she was on television a lot. I'd see her in little parts or whatever. But Watchmen was where I really noticed her and thought, oh, wow, she's really
That
good.
was the only movie I could think of with her in it.
There was a series that I loved her in called Threshold. It was like an NBC series, science fiction, really cool, but it only lasted like half a season. And they canned it. She's also in Sin City, which I remember. It's Sin City. I remember watching it, but I don't remember her in that. Oh, it's really good. It's Robert Rodriguez.
I still don't think I've seen it. I can't remember. It's been a long time ago. If I saw it, it was when it first came out. Moving on to her husband, Gerald. He is played by Bruce Greenwood.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen him in a bunch of stuff too, but I never really paid attention until he became a part of the Mike Flanagan entourage.
Yeah.
Did you?
I remember he was Pike in Star Trek, the reboot.
He looks like Pike.
Yeah.
I mean, he looks like he could play Captain Pike. What else is he known for? Just iRobot. I'm not seeing that. And then, of course, he's in those Star Trek films. I especially appreciate him more watching this movie a second time. I was like, oh, he's a lot better than I remember him being. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we've read about the controversy with the upcoming House of Usher series, where Frank Langella was let go for apparently some sexual misconduct with some of the female members of the cast and crew, and he was replaced by Bruce Greenwood. So now I'm like really looking forward to seeing Bruce Greenwood play Roderick Usher from Edgar Allan Poe.
It'll be very great, I think.
Yes.
He's really strong. He's really good. I think I'm like you. I didn't remember him that much the first time I saw this movie. And I think part of that was I was just so thrown off by how cruel he was as a character. Mm-hmm. You know, the things he was saying and the way he was just kind of, gloating over her being suffering, I just didn't like. And I kind of think I repressed a lot of that. Watching it this time, man, he's really strong and good.
And the whole time he's arguing with her about whether or not they're going to last as a couple or they're going to have sex or whatever. Did you find yourself screaming at the TV, unhandcuff her?
Yeah.
I mean, because she was saying it.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, stop it and just unhandcuff her, even though you know that's not going to happen.
But you can also see him, part of him liked her being that submissive. Yeah. He liked her being in that position. And unfortunately, but it was what he was enjoying.
And I mean, the whole rape fantasy. And then he's like, he's just doing it because he's pretending that she's role playing. He knows she's not role playing.
Yeah. And for the record, we're saying rape fantasy, meaning it's his, not hers. It's definitely not her fantasy.
Definitely not hers. It's him.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this movie is obviously about abusive men. So he and her father both fall into that category, which is why she has the flashback about her father.
Well, and Moonlight Man, for that matter. They're all three abusives.
Right. Moonlight's just, yeah. Chiara Aurelia played young Jessie. I do not know her at all, but I thought she was very good in that part. She didn't really have a lot of lines. It was basically her looking sad.
She was very strong, I thought, in the two big scenes she has. The scene during the eclipse and then the scene in the bedroom. Both of those I thought she was really strong in. And I'm curious why we haven't seen a lot more of her, because she is really good.
Yeah, I just looked. She's in things I've never heard of. Carol Struiken. I'm not sure how. Struiken?
Yeah.
Carol Struiken plays the Moonlight Man. The Moonlight Man. Well, first of all, Carol is a very tall actor. Yeah. Very much like Ted Cassidy. He played Lurch in the modern versions of the Addams Family. He was also, if I'm not mistaken, on Twin Peaks, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. He's the giant.
He's the giant opposite the little man, the little person. I can't think of his name.
Yes.
And he's great. And he does not look as creepy as he does in this film in person. The person in this film was afflicted with some disease we were talking about earlier that makes your appendages longer, like your arms and your legs.
Yeah, I have that. It's actually acromegaly, 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 which happens when the pituitary gland continues to release too many growth hormones after a person's adult skeleton has fused. It causes the face, hands, and feet to distend, sometimes with arms the length of knees. So
Right.
arms down to your knees kind of thing.
I don't know if there's any relation, but I associate it with like elephantitis. He looked a little bit like the Elephant Man, only less deformed.
As you were saying, Carl is not that deformed.
No,
that was
he's
makeup.
just very tall and gaunt. This is a lot of makeup on him.
Yes.
And he's perfect.
And also he played Grandpa Flick in Dr. Sleep.
In Dr. Sleep. So he is also in the Mike Flanagan entourage of actors now.
Yay.
Yeah, totally agree. Speaking of actors in his entourage, Henry Thomas played Tom. Now, who thought little Elliot from E.T. would be growing up to play all
abusing
these
daughters? Yes.
Well, that and the fact that he has turned out to be such a great actor, because it doesn't usually happen with kid actors. And he is great. I mean, he played Jack Torrance in the flashback scenes in Dr. Sleep. So he was emulating Jack Nicholson in that film. In this movie,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in this movie, he is the epitome of creepy because he's a lecherous father figure taking advantage of his daughter.
But done so well, not done in a leering kind of, not done like, Bev's father is in It or anything like that. He's much more subtle, and which is more insidious and more horrible. And you just reminded me, a key for him would be, I just forgot, but shoot, who's in Contact? Who's in Contact? The girl.
Matthew McConaughey?
No, the girl. What's
Jodie Foster?
Jodie Foster. A key for him is Jodie Foster. Both of them really good as child actors who grew up to be incredibly good actors and actresses. Or actors.
Well, Jodie made more money at it, but yeah, I see what you mean.
Well, he's still going. He's got time.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But yeah, Jodie.
Anyway, so I guess that's enough really about Henry Thomas. And then we also mentioned that Kate Siegel is in this movie. This is her fourth collaboration with Mike. Of course, this movie came out before some of the series that we mentioned. She had done Oculus, Hush, and Ouija before this film.
Wow.
And remember we talked when we covered Hush last season about how they were dating when they were writing that movie, and like their first date was like coming up with the idea for the movie Hush, and we were talking about how cool that would be.
Oh yeah.
It's like, we're going to get married, but we're also going to make a horror movie together.
And she's fine in this. I mean, she only really has 3 scenes, so that's okay. But that she's still so strong and so good, and she makes up for it in both Hell House and Bly Manor.
You mean Hill House? But yeah,
Hill House. Yeah.
She is. Something about her reminds me of Angelina Jolie. I don't know what it is. And I just think she's great. In this, she, like you said, she doesn't have a really big part. She's basically the wife that either doesn't know or is turning a blind eye to her husband's shenanigans with their oldest daughter. I think she confronts him, though, doesn't she?
Well, she doesn't confront him. She says he's daddying her. He is babying her and everything else. And basically says, I'm just going to go out on the boat with the kids and you can just stay here with your daughter. Yeah. Sort of thing. But I don't think she's aware of it, or at least at this point in their story.
Right.
So,
and then the only other cast member I have is very brief. But the court clerk was played by Jamie Flanagan. So I'm assuming that is relation to Mike somehow.
Maybe. Yeah.
Like Jamie Flanagan. I think he is I can't.
I just looked him up.
Yeah.
His writing credits
or like everything
include The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Midnight Club.
I think it's his brother.
Creep Show. Must be.
I think it's his brother. I should have done my research. I didn't. But anyway, he plays the court clerk in that scene where she confronts. I can't remember what that character. Well, they just call him the Moonlight Man in this. So I don't know what his name was, but I think they say his name in some of those newspaper articles she's looking at. As far as awards,
it says his sibling is Mike Flanagan.
Right.
So there you go.
So they're brothers. They're like Ivan and Sam Raimi.
Yep.
As far as awards, I just have a handful of small ones, but it did win. The Young Entertainer Awards, Chiara Aurelia, who played young Jessie, won that year for Young Entertainer of the Year. The iHorror Awards gave Best Actress to Carla Gugino.
Yes, she should have won an Emmy.
Yeah, she's amazing. Winner for the Fright Meter Awards also was Carla Gugino. And then nominated for the Fright Meter Awards were Flanagan for directing, screenplay, and editing. This movie is not on the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die list.
We have still got to do that for our Patreons. We've got to cover that list. And
I did make a list, so now I don't have to go look them up for this season. I already have them on, whether or not they're on the list. So I can just reference my list. So we could do a bonus episode just talking about films we've covered that are on this list.
Easily.
And ones that should be.
Mm-hmm.
But did you have any other things you wanted to discuss before we move on to keys?
No, I'm just looking at my notes real quick to find out. Oh, I did say, watching this after last week when we watched Mist, we talked about what an incredibly depressing ending that is. And Darabont stuck to his guns. That's what he wanted. I have in my notes. So if Darabont had directed and written this, she would suddenly wake up in bed and discover that her escape was all a dream and she's dying. Or to your point, Moonlight Man is strangling her or something, So,
cutting her toes off. Yeah.
Yeah. Cutting her toes off. Yeah. Oh, gross. They had to go there. No.
I have some real life history that could potentially relate to the novel and or the film.
Yeah.
In the novel, the solar eclipse in question is of July 20th, 1963. And the path totally crossed Maine. In this movie, it's presumably the one of May 30th, 1984, whose path of totally crossed New Orleans. So I'm assuming that this cabin on the water is in Louisiana. Did they ever say that?
Well, it was only confirmed because when she's looking at the headlines for the Moonlight Man, says that he was first seen in Mississippi and then moved
Alabama,
to Louisiana.
Okay.
Alabama to Louisiana.
Right.
And he was actually arrested in Louisiana, I think.
Okay.
And
so
she goes to the courthouse
there.
So,
yeah. I wonder why. I'm assuming that maybe that was a filming location. I don't know. Because I know that when we did The Mist last week, he filmed it in Louisiana, remember? Because Stephen King was impressed by how he made Louisiana look like Maine.
Yeah.
So I wonder if this was also filmed in Louisiana. It must be cheap to make movies there.
Yeah, it might have been a thing. Yeah, I don't know. If they offer enough credits, then filmmakers go there. Yeah. Tennessee and Georgia both know that. Look at Walking Dead.
Right.
So, yeah.
But that's the only trivia I had as far as anything.
Yeah, I don't have any other trivia.
Clips as well. I knew this would probably be a short one. It's a short movie.
I mean, I do have in my notes that my first key is Midnight Mass.
Is it? Because
that's
of the book she throws at the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I actually may have that in my keys that I copped from. You know what? I'll put it down there anyway, just in case. One of the keys I had that I thought of earlier when we were talking is when she hands him her wedding ring and puts it in his bag of gross collectibles as like penance for or payment for her escape. I thought this is medieval. I mean, this is mythological. It's Charon. She's like paying Charon, the boat driver, to go across the river Styx.
Interesting. Yes.
It's got mythological influence in it. I would say that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah.
I have, of course, this is Cujo Light because, it's Cujo. I mean, it's a dog. You're afraid of a dog and a dog kind of eating you.
Well, it's more than that. It's also being trapped in a place and unable to leave,
Yeah. Yeah. A female trapped in can't get out.
It's claustrophobic in a regard, even though it's a larger space. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that.
The novel obviously is a big key. We've neglected to mention that.
Of course.
And it is, like I said, very faithful to the novel. I don't remember all the conversations with the other husband and the other Jessie, but I'm assuming that was in the novel. It's been so long since I read it.
I'm pretty sure Gerald and Jessie are both her.
I mean, he would have had to.
Well.
Otherwise, it would just be a very short book, unless it was internal monologue, which kind of was anyway.
Yeah, it essentially was. Like I said at the beginning, I think this was a brilliant way to play that internal monologue in a very dramatic, cinematic way.
Right.
Very well done. And speaking of that, one of my keys is Animal House. That whole angel on your shoulder and devil on your shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
That's essentially what they are. And that comes from actually, I think, a Warner Brothers cartoon.
I was going to say it's from a cartoon. It's really Tom and Jerry, I think.
Yeah. It's that Tom and Jerry kind of feel, but the angel saying, don't do it, and the devil saying, do it. And this is that kind of cliche or stereotype.
Right. I mentioned the novel, and I would, of course, have to mention the sister novel, Dolores Claiborne, because they were connected and at times packaged together. There were a couple of novels that King had packaged together in the 90s. There was this one in Dolores Claiborne, and there was The Regulators, and I can't think of the name of that other book. Anyway, there were books that...
The one with Tack, the one in the mine. Yeah,
Desperation. That's the name. It was Desperation and The Regulators were packaged together, and this and Dolores Claiborne were packaged together as sister books, I guess you would call them.
So prolific that you can do a release of 2 novels at the same time.
Right. I think Desperation and The Regulators came out at the same time. I'm not sure if Dolores Claiborne came out at the same time as this, but if not, it was very shortly after.
Yeah. And Dolores Claiborne is. So the link is Dolores Claiborne, or the key reference is Dolores Claiborne takes place during the same eclipse. Only another abused woman somewhere else.
Dolores kills her husband, who is abusive, and she throws him in a well, and she does all this during the eclipse.
Okay.
If you've not seen that movie, you need to see it, because that's a great movie.
There's a shot in this of the well.
There is.
Well with the eclipse.
There is.
So that's a reference to Dolores.
That's a reference. That's another Easter egg that Mike Flanagan's tossing in there for us Stephen King fans.
Okay. And Kathy Bates plays her in the movie?
Yes.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
I would. My favorite line from that book is Dust Bunnies. She's taking care of this old woman that is bedridden, if I'm not mistaken, and going like she's got dementia or something. And she's like horribly terrified of dust bunnies. So she's constantly screaming, dust bunnies, dust bunnies. Yeah, it's very strange. It's a good book, though. I would actually say that I probably liked Dolores a little better than Gerald's Game.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because it's grounded more in reality. That's for sure. The movie
Pretty high
also
praise.
stars Jennifer Jason Leigh. Yeah, it gets an 85 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's pretty damn good. I haven't read that book in a while though, but I do remember liking that book better than Gerald's Game.
Okay.
You mentioned Cujo. Well, they actually call that dog Cujo at one point in this film.
Oh, he does.
Gerald refers to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Get out of the road, Cujo, or something like that, or whatever. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I have one I don't know if you would get, but you used this key last week, I believe.
Yeah.
Zanty Misfits. Because it's that, but it's not so much that one as it's the other one, Marooned, or is it Zanty, the one with Agnes Moorehead?
No, the one with Agnes Moorehead is not Zanty Misfits. Zanty Misfits is Outer Limits. The Agnes Moorehead is Twilight Zone.
Yes, that's the one I meant.
I can't remember the name of it though.
I'll look that up real quick. But that one is.
Well, what is the key?
It's the single solitary story of a woman trying to survive and trapped in this cabin sort of thing, and how she slowly fights back any way she can, kind of thing. That's what this is in a microcosm, but the macrocosm out of it is she's also fighting against her past, her relationships, everything else, and finds out that little code at the end of there was a serial killer here the whole time kind of thing. But yeah, it reminds me of that Agnes Moorehead kind of woman fighting. It's not the only story like that, but that's the one that triggered me, was a single female fighting for, to survive by herself alone in a cabin.
Well, Agnes Moorehead is like got little Martians or something, little aliens, doesn't it?
Yeah. A saucer is in her attic and they're attacking her, and she's mute too. She can't speak.
That's very Trilogy of Terror.
Yeah.
You
was
mentioned
an episode of Twilight Zone called The Invaders.
The Invaders. I need to put that down.
Yep. So that's what I meant to say by Zanty Misfits, because Zanty Misfits is also aliens, but they're little bitty bugs.
Right. And isn't that, I can't remember if that's Harlan or not. Harlan wrote a lot of Outer Limits. I do remember that. Harlan Ellison. Yeah.
But I don't think he wrote Zanty.
I don't think he wrote that one either. You've already mentioned that Flanagan likes to throw in Stephen King Easter eggs. And of course, the big one is The Dark Tower, when he references all things serve the beam. That is not in the book. If it is in the book, I don't remember it. Maybe it is. It wouldn't surprise me if it is, because by then he was, in the midst of that saga. So it could be in there. This is one I got from IMDb because I wouldn't know this, but that headboard you see behind her when she is chained to the bed is from the mirror of Oculus, the movie he did prior.
I did see that in a trivia thing.
Yeah, they use, he always finds a way to put that mirror in his movies. Very similar to Raimi putting that car into all his movies.
That makes sense.
Funny.
That's kind of a cool little gag.
Do that. Yeah. Do you have more?
No. The only other one I have is the one you mentioned, which I had not thought of, but is perfect, is Jeffrey Dahmer. That is such a probably a key inspiration, maybe for King, and that led to the Moonlight Man.
Yeah, especially the scene of him in court. In the book, he was in an orange jumpsuit, and I remember we always saw Jeffrey Dahmer in that orange jumpsuit. Always. In this movie, he's in. Oh, he is in an orange jumpsuit. I was thinking it was a beige one, but yeah, he's in an orange jumpsuit in there.
Yep.
Other keys in reference to Stephen King. Jessie talks about the Moonlight Man's Bag of Bones, and that is another Stephen King novel, Bag of Bones.
Mm-hmm.
And in the movie or the book Bag of Bones, if I'm not mistaken, it's a woman's remains are in a bag at the bottom of a lake or something. And
it's one of those where you have to. It's a supernatural, the series kind of thing where we have to free the spirit because the bones are
right.
buried somewhere. We got to.
And I haven't seen that movie in a long time. I can't remember if it's any good or not.
But I remember
several Stephen King adaptions are not good. That's why it's hard to pick them sometimes.
True. Well, and you made me think, the first time Moonlight Man comes and opens up his box, it's right after Gerald has said that line about, a woman alone, a woman in the dark. We like to think that it's just fantasies or dreams, but, it might be real, blah, blah, blah. And it comes forward and he opens it up and it's got like a necklace and bones and all that. But when she's leaving and he opens it up, it's in her fantasy or her nightmare since the escape. She envisions him in her room and he opens it up and the handcuffs are in it. Or in the bag. I thought that was another cool. Flanagan does stuff like that makes you think for a second, that kind of throws you off, that you go, does that mean something? Does it not? Who cares? It's great. It's cool.
Right. Well, speaking of which, I don't remember this in the novel either, but another allusion is to a Stephen King book is The Shining. And it is in the scene where Henry Thomas is talking to his daughter and he says something about taking their medicine, which is what Torrance would tell Danny in The Shining. Come here, boy, and take your medicine.
Take your medicine.
In other words, I'm going to hit you with a croquet mallet.
Or myself in the face. Yes.
And what's ironic about it is what I said before, is that Henry Thomas went on to play Jack Torrance in Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining, directed by Mike Flanagan. Boxes within boxes.
meta, sanctioned by Stephen King. Yes.
Yeah.
This is interesting. To do these two back to back was really interesting. And I think next week's going to be even more of a wow.
Yeah. Next week's a double feature.
Oh my gosh.
I do like that we're doing more modern representations of Stephen King. It was fun to go back and revisit Carrie and Salem's Lot. But it's even more fun to experience these directors like Darabont and Mike Flanagan now doing Stephen King.
Yeah. And how he is still applicable. I do think King will probably go down as one of the greatest writers of the 20th century.
I think he already has, because the 20th century is over.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we're 20 years into the 21st century.
But people say, people talk about Clancy or, Herman Wouk or all these others.
John Grisham.
John Grisham. They're the great, novelists of the 20th century. I go, no, Stephen King is the greatest novelist of the 20th century.
Well, and you're only mentioning latter 20th century. I mean, you're not including Hemingway and Steinbeck and those guys.
Yeah.
So,
but okay, they're still, none of them are as prolific as King.
None of them were as prolific. They were they had more cred because they were considered, the suffering artists, the ones that only produce one book every decade or whatever.
Right.
Stephen King outruns them in a marathon any day, because he's kicking out, 2 to 4 a year, where they're kicking out 2 to 4 a lifetime.
Yeah.
Basically. I mean, not all. I mean, there are some that put more than that out.
Yeah, I mean, does this novel and movie have the literary cred of like The Shining or It or something like that? No, but it's still great and well done and well paced and just a unique look that gives you images that you remember. Yeah. King can make. We used to say King can make a paperclip scary kind of thing. He can take random normal objects or situations and make them terrifying. I mean, this is essentially, be careful what you wish for in the King game, because it can go really off the rails really quick.
Yeah, this is one of those things I was like, he had this idea in the shower one morning and it just developed in an entire day. He just went, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah. Because I mean, it's a very easy concept. to develop into something. I mean, I doubt it took him very long to write this at all.
Yeah, agreed.
But as far as books that he's known for that are considered, literary or like highly regarded, I mean, you mentioned The Shining, but I mean, I don't even think that was highly regarded. I would think a book like 11/22/63 could be up there. It's like when we were talking about this movie coming out called The Last Voyage of the Demeter, where you take a very small piece of the book Dracula and expand it into its own story. Very similar. This is that time span of when Kennedy was assassinated and a story he kind of writes around it. And it's actually a time travel story too. So it's really good. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend that series too.
Well, I think King will always be, I mean, one of his literary opuses is The Stand. It literally is. And no other author has done what he's done with Dark Tower. The tie-ins to every freaking other novel ever written by him and this universe he created. I don't think anyone has, even as prolific as like the guy that did Wheel of Time, or J.R. Tolkien. Yes, as good as they were, or as tight knit as their universe building that they work, Dark Knight is so much more than that, because it's not just the novels, it's the television series, and it's this idea over here, and it's this, and this character over here. It's just going,
it grew into a monster, but it started off with him as a college student watching spaghetti westerns and reading Tolkien.
Yeah.
So he basically said, well, wonder if I could do an epic fantasy, but have a cowboy in it. And it kind of grew from there. Where it got really crazy is that he took meta to a whole new extreme. I mean, not only did he start connecting all of his books to the tower, all things serve the beam, but all of a sudden he connected himself to it. And all of a sudden he's a character in the latter novels. And you're like, I cannot believe Stephen King is writing himself as a character in this book. And that there is a world where Salem's Lot happened. And there is a world where it was a book. And there is a Father Callahan who is a major character in this book, lifted out of a series he wrote 3 decades prior or whatever. It's crazy. It is. That's why I love it so much, because you're right. Nobody has ever done that before. Nobody.
No. I mean, Hemingway never wrote a book where he talked to himself, or met himself as a character, sort of thing. So,
or he was in Spain and met the old man in the sea because he was up, being taken care of by a nurse in World War I. I mean, he does not connect all those things.
And I think Mike Flanagan is rising so quickly and continuing to do such great work that I think eventually he'll be up there as one of the greatest directors too. He's very niche, he's not jumping out of horror because he does it so well. So keep going there, buddy.
And he's modern to a different, he's more modern than, let's say, a Spielberg, because he is of the era of streaming. So he is, directing movies for streaming, directing series for streaming, which other directors, it was kind of a foreign concept to them at the time. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a whole new medium per se. So I would say he's a giant there for sure.
But his visual ability to do stuff like Midnight Mass and Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep, so much so that Stephen King, gave homage not only to Kubrick, but to himself, kind of thing, endorsement, and said, you can mix them up. Do it that way. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
And he also knew about the whole history of Stephen King disliking the movie, and he was trying to make it up, and also trying to patch the differences, but, by saying, let me help you get past this hatred you had for this film. So it's like he not only makes a great film, but he also makes Stephen King a better person per se. It's crazy. Okay. Flanagan worship over.
Okay, yeah. Adoration. But any other keys? You go with keys?
No, I'm done.
Okay, so all of you guys out there listening and watching, thank you so much for joining us today as we dove into our kink of getting handcuffed to the bedpost and not eaten by dogs and facing horrible memories from our past. We're so glad. That's what Tim and I think about it all and the references we made. We'd love to hear from you guys. Did you see any keys that we didn't, or you agree or disagree with anything we said? Please leave us a comment down below. Let us know. You can also email us. You can go to the website and find others. If you want to support the podcast, we would love your support, and it would help us keep doing this. Tell your friends about it, but also consider Patreon. We have a lot of original material there. That's some of it's free, but also some of it is subscriber based. We have 2 other podcasts there. We have the Dilithium Chamber, which is classic Star Trek, and we have the X-Files Declassified, which of course is X-Files episodes. 2 other great series that we like and support. Again, we're continuing next week into our Christmas with King, or
Christmas extravaganza,
contemporary King Christmas. So a lot of
21st century Stephen King. Yeah, I guess that'll be our last episode of 2023, other than bonus episodes, maybe. Yeah,
halfway through our 6th season, or a third of the way through our 6th
close.
Season.
About 15 in for sure.
Yeah. All right, Tim, I'll see you next week.
All right, take care.
You can't start the car. Johnny